Hey everyone, welcome. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Welcome to Charles Commons at the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland, the greatest city in America. I am Sam Novi. I'm a visiting fellow at the Agora Institute, and I'm so excited to be hosting this event tonight about 100% democracy. It's the start of the 100% Democracy Celebration, which is a series we're hosting all spring here at Agora to celebrate some of the boldest ideas bringing America towards full participation. And I want to just thank a couple of people before we start today. So first off, I know there's some folks from Hopkins Votes here. Do you guys want to stand up? So you guys stand up for a second. This is Alex. I didn't get your name in the back. I love the work that faculty members do and the work that Washington Post columnists do and senior fellows do at universities. But at the end of the day, we're going to build a democracy that includes everyone. That work starts at registration tables on campus quads and in farmers markets and in church basements all across the country. And that's the kind of work that Hopkins Votes is doing. So I just want to take a second to recognize them and make sure that everybody on this campus is supporting the work of this Campus Vote Coalition, because they have, I think, doubled the campus voting rates in 2016. Is that right? Yeah, so the campus voting rate here has gone through the roof, and it's thanks to their work. Let's give them another round of applause. I also wanted to thank our co-sponsors of this afternoon's event, the Baltimore College Town Network, Hopkins Votes, the Johns Hopkins Political Science Department, the Johns Hopkins Center for Talented Youth, the Center for Creative Citizenship at MICA, and the Globe Press, which has made some of the beautiful posters that are available here for folks online. If you if you email me your mailing address, I will mail you a poster. And the Students Learn Students Vote Coalition, and obviously the SNF Agora Institute. Let's give a round of applause for our amazing co-sponsoring organization. I wanted to invite Hari Han, the director of SNF Agora Institute, who's done some amazing research on how we can lay the groundwork for the kind of radical and exciting change for our democracy that Miles and EJ are talking about. I was going to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Sam. Can you guys hear me? Okay, so I am really delighted to be able to welcome you all to this terrific event, and I know we're going to have a really great discussion about this book. I want to thank EJ and Miles and Clarissa for coming all the way to the greatest city in America, Baltimore, and to the Homewood campus, the greatest campus in America, to be part of this conversation. Thank you also to all of our co-sponsors who have helped put this event together. And of course, thank you to all of you, both those of you who are here in person and to everyone who is joining us online for being part of this event. Today, we're going to be talking with both EJ and Miles about their new book called 100% Democracy, A Case for Universal Voting. The book argues that universal participation in elections should be a cornerstone of our democracy, of really any democracy, and that it would protect against voter suppression, disenfranchisement of large groups of citizens, and it would create a system in which the government truly was based on consent of all the governed, which is really what the aspirations of democracy are and should be. And so we're going to be inviting all of you to be part of this discussion with them to debate the question, should universities require students to vote? I'd love to hear all of the thoughts that you guys have, both those of you who are online and those of you who are here in the room. So I'm going to introduce our speakers more fully in just a second, but first let me just say a couple words about why we're so excited to be hosting this event at SNF Agora. So for those of you who don't know, the SNF Agora Institute is still a relatively new institute at Johns Hopkins, and we're an academic center and a public forum that is dedicated to improving and expanding civic engagement and informed, inclusive dialogue as a cornerstone of global democracy. And our mission, in a lot of ways, the way that we talk about it, is that's really to realize the promise of the ancient Agora in modern times. And so that's exactly, in some ways, what the book is really talking about, is how we can really realize that ideal. If you were to imagine, like, what would it look like to have a democracy in which 100% of the people participated? What would it look like if every person in this room, every person at Johns Hopkins, every person in Baltimore voted and participated in the process of imagining the world that we want and then working together to create that possibility? Much of the work that I do is on organizing and social movements, and part of the reason why I was drawn into that research was because I've always loved the way that social movements play this important role in helping expand our horizons to imagine what kind of world could be possible. They encourage us to envision a world of radical change, very much like the book that EJ and Miles have written to us. And so one of the things I'd love for us to think about today is how do we make that vision a reality? And one of the things that we learn from history and science of social movements is really that it always begins with those of us who are people like us who are in the room today working together. And so we're really excited to hear how we can do that. So let me now introduce our guests. EJ Dionne, who's at the end of the table, is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute, a syndicated columnist for the Washington Post, a university professor at Georgetown University, and a visiting professor at Harvard University. He clearly does not have enough work to do. He is also the author of Code Red, How Progressives and Moderates Can Unite to Save Our Country. Miles Rapoport is the Senior Practice Fellow in American Democracy at the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation at the Harvard Kennedy School. He formerly served in the Connecticut State Legislature and as Connecticut Secretary of State, and he also served as president of Demos and of Common Cause, two great organizations. Our moderator, Clarissa Unger, is co-founder and executive director of Students Learn, Students Vote. She has a background in advocacy, communications, fundraising, and political campaigns, and has worked on strategic campaigns both nationally and internationally. Prior to founding the SLSV Coalition, she served as a development coordinator for the Robert J. Dole Institute of Politics at the University of Kansas, where she helped promote civic and democratic engagement on campus. The coalition she now leads supports over 2,000 colleges and universities in thinking about questions around things like universal voting and helps them take action to build 100% democracy. So I hope today's conversation will inspire all of us to imagine how through local action, we can build a movement for full participation that creates more room for bold ideas about democracy. So let's get started. The way it's going to work is Clarissa is going to lead the conversation with Miles and EJ for about 30 minutes, and then we'll take questions from the audience. When it comes time for questions for people who are online, please for people who are in the room, please come up to the mics. Or do we have mics, or are we gonna? People can just stand up and okay. Yeah, so we have mics in the room. So for those of you who are in the room, please use the mics when you ask your questions. That way people on the Zoom can also hear them. And for people who are attending virtually, you can submit your question using the Q&A box. And then Clarissa will be able to moderate those questions from the computer. So Clarissa, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Hari, and thank you, Sam, as well. It's very exciting to be here with you all today. And thank you also to EJ and Miles. I'm very excited for this discussion. So we only have a limited amount of time, and I think this discussion could go on for hours. So just to kick it off, EJ, why don't you just tell us how you two came together to write this book, and also why you think universal civic duty voting is a policy that should be adopted here in the United States?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Clarissa and Hari and Sam. And I just met, I was lucky enough to have a cup of tea with some folks before. And anybody in the room, these are the coolest people. Now, you may wonder, what do I know about cool? But I think that no group will make voting more attractive than the group of people I had tea with. And I also want to thank Miles, my dear and wonderful co-author. Sam showed me where to park, and I mentioned Miles, and Sam said, Miles is a legend. And that's true. Miles is a legend in the democracy world. And I've been telling people that if Miles has so much energy, that if Europe could simply tap Miles's energy, they would never need another drop of Russian oil or gas. So he's really we've had great fun with this book. And I really should let Miles tell the story because Miles approached me at the beginning of this project because my dear friend Bill Galston and I at the Brookings Institution had written a paper in 2015 calling for universal voting, universal civic duty voting, essentially adopting the Australian system where everyone is required to cast a ballot. And Miles said, would you join me in creating a working group? And we are blessed to have at least one working group member. Whitney Quisenberry is in the room. Thank you. And it was just this extraordinary group of people from the democracy community, the civil rights and voting rights communities, some great political scientists, some awesome lawyers. We have a readable legal brief in this book, written not like a legal brief, although you could translate it into a legal brief from English pretty easily, to argue why this is constitutional. It was just this great group of people, and we met for a couple of years and sort of tested this idea every which way. I want to let Miles talk about that part, but I just want to talk a bit very briefly about how I came to this. And I came to this from two directions. One is I happen to have a long-standing interest in Australian politics and have actually been blessed by spending quite a lot of time down there. And I got to see how their system works. And Australia has had a system of what they call compulsory attendance at the polls for 100 years. They instituted it in the 1920s, and turnout immediately shot up and has stayed up at around 90% of the electorate. But it's not just that everybody votes, as important as that is. Election days in Australia are really a celebration of freedom. We quote somebody in the book who told the New York Times that elections are like a party in Australia. Polling places become civic centers where every civic group you can think of is selling some food, some wonderful food of some kind to raise money for a local school or a local charity. Australia is known for democracy sausages that are the most commonly sold. What is it? Comestible? What's that great word? Stuff you can eat at the polling place. And they have a sense of humor in Australia. Just recently, the Australian Election Board sent out a non-formal ruling saying the onion should be on top of the democracy sausage, not underneath. A friend in Australia saw the book and sent this to me the other day. And there are a couple other things that this does down there, which is elections are not as they are here, which are essentially elite dinner parties. Think about how we think about election day. Think about how political consultants think about elections. There is an A list of likely voters, and then B and C lists of everybody else who don't necessarily vote that often. So all the political energy, all of the communication, all of the persuasion efforts, all of the efforts to pull people to polls are utterly concentrated on an A list of voters. Whereas this system, by requiring everyone to vote, and we'll talk about how our system would work as we go on, brings everybody in, and it changes the character of the democracy. No longer would you have political parties running ads, not only just trying to turn out their base, but also by trying to discourage the other side's base from voting, because everybody knows that everybody will vote, and that changes the character of the system. And that's the second reason I came to this. I know it's also one of the reasons Miles came to this, which is I have been very upset, as I'm sure a lot of people in this room have been, about voter suppression efforts in the United States. We make a point in the book of saying, if we look at 2020, we should be incredibly proud of ourselves as a country. Through all these mechanisms to make voting easier, we produced a turnout. Somebody wants to suppress our voices here. Thank you. Bless you. Thank you. Or maybe I was so electrifying I screwed up the circuit. So I don't think it's that. We had an election in a pandemic and had a 66.7% turnout, the highest turnout. In many ways, the highest turnout in history, because past turnouts were electorates that excluded lots of people. People took advantages of all their opportunities to vote. I'd like to note I cast my mail ballot in a drop box in front of Walt Whitman High School in Bethesda, Maryland. And I love that for two reasons. One is our kids went to Walt Whitman High School, but two is Walt Whitman is the poet of American democracy. And yet we have these efforts to roll back those advances. Final point I'll make, and it's a point we make in the book, the founders of our country in the Declaration of Independence said that government is legitimate only if it has the consent of the governed. They did not write if it has the consent of 66.7% of the governed. They didn't write if it has, if it is supported by 40% of the governed, which is our midterm turnout, it was the consent of the governed. And we want a system where consent of the governed means all of the governed, which is why our brilliant editor gave our book the title 100% Democracy.
Thanks, EJ. And I'll start actually by just echoing the compliment, which is that working on this book with EJ has been a real delight. I mean, people know him as a kind of incredibly prolific and well-regarded columnist and book writer and media personality, but he's also a genuinely really wonderful guy. And so we have had nothing but good experiences working on this together. So thank you. And I also want to thank Sam, who did a great amount of organizing for this, and Hari, who is a hero of mine, even though I'm a little older than she is, nevertheless. And
Hari,
very much
hero works really well
Yeah.
together. It looks like a bumper sticker, you know?
HHH, wherever I heard it. And Clarissa, thank you very much to you and Students Learn Student Votes. This is great. It's a great opportunity. So I did actually come to this a little bit differently from EJ. So I started my career actually as a community organizer, Hari, for 15 years before I ever got into politics. But then I spent 15 years in Connecticut politics, all around the issue of voting rights, expansion, campaign finance reform, gerrymandering and redistricting, all of those issues. And as president of Demos and as president of Common Cause, I worked on the same thing. So essentially, I have been spending about close to 40 years working on these very issues of process, often kind of feeling a little bit marginalized over here with the process people, as opposed to the real work on healthcare and inequality and economics. But I'm a real believer that working on this process matters and that we can really make progress. So I have worked on issues that many of you have probably worked on: same-day voter registration, automatic voter registration, restoration of voting rights for people with felony convictions, pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds, early voting, expanded mail-in voting. Just there's a whole kind of suite or a panoply almost of reforms. And I want to be very clear, I believe in them. I have worked on them and I have seen them work. And the truth is, I think that the 2018 and 2020 turnouts, which were both records. I mean, 50% turnout in the 2018 election was, way above what had happened in 2014. And I think a good part of that was because the process had been opened up by 2018 around these policies. And then in 2020, with all, as EJ said, all the things that were done to make it possible to vote in COVID. So, I've worked on those things and I've believe in them, and they have moved the needle, but not very much is the real honest answer, which is if you say 66% is a record shattering turnout for the United States and 50% in the midterms of 2018, that's really nothing to write home about. And so I started to say, well, listen, after 40 years of either kind of working on the margins or rolling the ball up the hill, whatever metaphor you want to use, is there something that really could move the needle and move it in a significant way? And right about that time, I did see that the piece that EJ and Bill Galston wrote for Brookings. And I read it, and the truth is, I said to myself, I've been working on this stuff for 35 years. Australia has had this for 100 years. I have never, ever been in a conversation about this. No one has ever told me about this. This has been absent from the political discussion in the United States. And so I was like taken with it. And then when EJ turned up at Harvard, we had dinner and I screwed up my courage to say, would you be willing to create a working group and co-chair it with me? And to my great delight, he agreed. So with Whitney and about 28 other people, we studied it for about 2 years. We issued a report in 2020 called Lift Every Voice, the Urgency of Universal Civic Duty Voting. We've shortened the title a little bit for the book. And then the group really wants to continue. And then, of course, Diane Wachtel, who's the fabulous publisher of the New Press, contacted me and said, I'm a huge fan of universal voting. I've been wanting somebody to write a book about it for 5 years. Would you be willing to write a book? So we didn't have to find a publisher. The publisher found us. And I said, would you mind terribly if I co-wrote it with EJ Dionne, because he and I have been working together? And she said something like, twist my arm. So anyway, so we wrote this together. It took us, about 6 months. We built on the work of the working group, and now it's out. And I really feel strongly that this is a it's putting out a North Star. It's not saying drop everything else that you're doing, just work on universal voting. All of the reforms that I talked about and all of the mobilization efforts and all of the organizing efforts that are going on are critically important. But put this out there a little bit as a North Star. What is it that we really want? We want everybody to be participating. And there we have examples in 25 countries around the world. We use Australia a lot because it seems so simpatico, but in Latin America, in Europe, in several countries in Africa, this has been in place in democratic countries. And I think it's something that we really want to put on the table for discussion. So that brings us to today.
Great. Well, and as we try to wrap our head around the concept of civic duty voting, because as you mentioned, it's not something that's been talked about a lot here in the United States. There's a really helpful comparison that you make in the book with jury duty. And in the book, you talk about how jury duty really helps to strengthen the judicial system and how civic duty voting would help to strengthen our electoral system. So can you talk a little bit about that comparison and also maybe why you think that we're so accepting of jury duty, but civic duty voting seems such a foreign concept, or how it may someday not seem so foreign?
Well, thank you for that. And jury duty, I should mark the place in the book where jury duty is, because I always try to find it, because I go to I found it, thank goodness. Great quote from Charles Ogletree.
I just talk, EJ flips through the book to find actually what we actually wrote. It's really great.
Chapter 1, paragraph 6 or verse 6. We have to remember that dropping the racial barriers, dropping racial discrimination in participating in jury duty was one of the greatest victories of the civil rights movement, because juries have the power to take away your rights, to take away your property, to fine you. And in the past, many states barred Black Americans from serving on juries. But think about the kind of victory this was. Black Americans won the right to be required to serve on juries. We have this requirement because we know that a jury of your peers should really mean a jury of your peers, which means it should include all kinds of citizens, that juries that systematically exclude certain kinds of people will not constitute a fair legal system. And Charles Ogletree, the legendary civil rights lawyer and professor at Harvard Law School, made the point that people talk about compelling people to do something like voting or serving on juries. That doesn't sound very American. And indeed, people do sometimes complain about serving on juries. Ogletree wrote an introduction, a foreword to a great book called Why Jury Duty Matters, where he wrote, "Today, perhaps as a measure of our progress, all races, all citizens groan equally loudly when the jury summons appears in the mail. Today, the right to participate occasionally becomes overshadowed with the obligations and inconvenience attendant to the summons. Yet the reason why participation in jury service matters has not changed over the years. The constitutional strength of this country begins with its citizens. A jury gives ordinary people extraordinary power." And exactly the same thing can be said of the right to vote. It gives ordinary people extraordinary power. Now, since these questions will come up, I just want to say a couple of things about the system we propose. Number one, being good Ameririans. And looking back at the history of the selective service, we actually provide a conscientious objector status. If somebody really, really, truly doesn't want to morally participate in the political process, they can apply for that. The fine is very small. The point of this is not the penalties. We suggest a fine of no more than $20. Most people won't have to pay the fine. If you look at the Australian system, because they allow you get a summons in the mail if you don't vote, and you write back and say, I was sick on election day, or any sort of reasonable excuse, they're not going to fine you. And only about 13% of people have to pay the fine. Although, funnily enough, a lot of people don't mind. I was at did a TV thing last week, and one of the camera people was an Australian and said, "Oh my God, I got to pay my fine. I forgot to vote in our local election." And she wasn't resentful at all, but only a small number of people have to pay the fine. There is a legitimate concern that we ran into when we were running the working group of a kind of Ferguson problem, that low income people, particularly Black Americans, have been suffered from one fine after another. Then there's interest, and then there's criminal warrants, and it becomes a total mess. No criminal warrants attached to this. This would not be a criminal penalty. No interest. It stays at $20. And if you don't want to pay the fine, you could do an hour of community service, which is about what it might take to leave your house under the system we envision, because we think no one should ever have to wait more than a half hour to vote. That would take about an hour. Community service would make up for about roughly the hour you put in from door back to door to go vote. But we think it could provide us with the same victory for democracy and fairness and justice that a non-discriminatory jury duty brought about.
You know, I want to just kind of put an exclamation point on the analogy, because it's really stuck with me, which is the reasoning behind why we have a compulsory jury service, which is to make sure that it is a representative sampling of people who decide guilt and innocence and penalty, is 100% applicable to voting, which is we want to have a fully representative sample of the people of this country making the decisions. That's what gives it validity. That's what gives us confidence that they're made right. If you have an electorate, which is at this point, you know, older, whiter, more educated, you know, richer than the population as a whole, then you get political decisions that are skewed towards that grouping. And so the idea is, if you have an actual representative sampling, I think the decisions will become different and more reflective of the needs of the population as a whole. I want to say one or two just very quick things about the other advantages to the system, because the representativeness, the increase in turnout and representativeness are two immediate ones. And I think the analogy with jury duty points that out. But in addition, I think the institutions of government, of business, and of civil society would bend themselves to do this. So my favorite example is, if I'm a principal of a high school and I know that every single graduating senior is going to have to vote, am I going to make sure that civic education is an important part of the curriculum? I think I will. You know, and if I'm a nonprofit organization and all of the people that we serve, whatever the population is that we serve, are required to vote, would we make that an important part of our agenda? I think we would. So my point is, I think the institutions would bend toward it. EJ already made the point about the campaigns, but I think campaigns would have a real benefit from the system, which is that instead of spending enormous amounts of money, enormous amounts of work, getting out your people, your own voters, your ones or your primes or whatever you want to call them, you've got to persuade and talk to everyone. Everyone is always listening, and everyone is going to be voting. And so that's your audience. And I think that would be an incredibly healthy thing for parties and candidates to have to do. So I just think that there's the original benefit, which is to make turnout close to 100%. And then I think there would be a number of collateral benefits as well.
Miles, you want to tell them the story about you were knocking on doors, which then I will say I don't fully believe, but I'll tell you why. But let me have Miles tell the story.
All right. So I actually ran in 11 elections. I won the first 10 and lost the 11th. That's how I became that's how I got to Demos. Anyway, and but if I went door to door, I love door knocking. I loved organizing. I went door to door, but I was given a list at the beginning of the night of, first of all, registered voters. And then they would also be further coded as who's a likely voter. And I was told by my campaign people, do not stop and talk to anybody who is not on your list. If they're not on your list, they can't help you and you're wasting your time. So I literally would walk down the street and there might be 3 or 4 people sitting outside on the lawn. But if they weren't on the list, I passed them by. You know what I mean? And so they didn't count. They were not part of the counting. And as EJ has said on a number of occasions, once you're registered, once you're in the system, once you're required to participate in our system, you get the mailings, you get the phone calls, you get the text messages, you just become part of the whole system as opposed to being excluded from it. And so I learned that, that was a discipline that I had to teach myself. I didn't like it. I really didn't like it, but I did it.
I told Miles that knowing him now as well as I do, I can't imagine he didn't stop and talk to those other people anyway. And then it took a bunch of campaign aides to drag him away, to send him to somebody who was #1 on the prime voter list. But with the story is very revealing, because I think that is a core problem with our campaigns right now.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that story. I think it's appalling for people who haven't been involved in political campaigns to learn that that's how they're run and how many people really are excluded from.
And
the
it's not
campaign
irrational
process.
under the current
Yeah.
system.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course, my other favorite part of campaigning was when they locked me in a dark room with a
Oof.
Diet Coke and a bag of potato chips and had me call donors cold for hours on end. That was also my other favorite thing.
It's also a fun part of being in a nonprofit as
Yes.
well, right? EJ, you touched on this a little bit, but there's an important distinction that you make in the book between mandatory participation in elections and mandatory voting. And you're arguing for mandatory participation in elections. Can you talk a little bit about that distinction and what participation in elections other than voting could look like?
Yeah, only a very few people in this room are old enough to remember Richard Nixon, but whenever a reporter asked a question that Nixon didn't like, he'd say, "I'm glad you asked that question." In this case, I really am glad you asked that question, because it is very important to the way we structure this for two different reasons. Under our system, you are required to participate. You don't have to vote for anybody. You can cast a blank ballot. You can write your favorite poem on the ballot. You could, I presume, scroll an obscenity across the ballot if you were really mad. And then we would also provide a none of the above option on the ballot. We do this for two reasons. One is nobody should be forced to vote for someone they don't want, as just a matter of general principle. And if you don't like any of the names on the ballot, any of the people on the ballot, you should have to vote for them. And that's why the affirmative none of the above. We don't say this in the book. I've always had the view that if none of the above ever won, the idea would be you force a new election. Although, as Miles has pointed out, in most states, Nevada and Arizona have it, and only a very small number of people actually check none of the above. But we give that option. So A, it's just, we think, the right thing to do. But B, we had a wonderful group of lawyers and academics I mentioned earlier. If I can shout them out: Allegra Chapman, Josh Douglas, Cecily Hines, and Brenda Wright really helped us on this legal chapter. And if you look at the case law, there would be legitimate problems with a system that forced you to make a choice, because that would be regarded as compelled speech, and the government can't compel you to speak. And, there are cases where students don't have to say the Pledge of Allegiance, for example, a famous court case on that. But you can, as jury duty suggests, compel certain behavior. At the high level, jury duty; at the basic level, stop at a stop sign. There are all kinds of behaviors that are compelled. And so, as a legal matter, we believe that this system is constitutional because we are requiring your participation, but we're not requiring you to vote for anyone.
Great. And one of the things that I found the most fascinating about the book is that I think, we may think of civic duty voting as being a responsibility of the individual, but I might have been reading through the lines a little bit, but I also kind of read that you're also arguing that civic duty voting is also somewhat a responsibility of the state.
Yeah.
Because they also have a responsibility to make sure that voting is easy and accessible. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the other corresponding election reforms that would go along with your view of civic duty voting.
What is it? This is former secretary of the state. You learn a lot of things writing a book. Because of Miles, I've learned that Connecticut is the only state in the union where the title Secretary of State is actually Secretary of the State. So may the former Secretary of the State speak on this one.
Yeah, I was mentioning before, the other set of reforms, we actually call them in the book gateway reforms, because they are, on the one hand, they are in and of themselves helpful and important and make our system better, but they also are the things that are necessary in order to successfully implement any kind of a universal voting system. So what they do in Australia, going back to Australia, the federal election election agency, does an incredible amount of education and outreach to get everybody registered. As of last December, 96.3% of all Australians were registered. And of those, 91.1% voted in the 2019 election. So you're really talking about, a 90% turnout, whereas, it puts us to complete shame. But one of the reasons that happens is because not only the election officials, which are nonpartisan, civil service, we're the only place in the world where partisan election officials administer elections. I had to supervise my own recount once upon a time. So
You won that one too.
yes, I did. But there's outreach, there's education, there's all kinds of ways in which voting is made easy. The unions, the civil society organizations, they're all doing the same thing, et cetera. So what I think would happen is that election officials, if the culture said we are all voting, 100% voting, they would then, have that as their responsibility, not to figure out ways to keep people from voting or to make it harder for people voting or removing drop boxes, but rather making the system such that people could do it. And I think that's one of the ways in which people would bend to this. Just a couple of the gateway reforms that we're talking about. Obviously, I'll say the negative. I'll say the flip side for a minute, which is obviously if you have a system which says everyone must vote, and you superimpose that on a system that makes it really, really difficult for people, that's a recipe for disaster. Okay. Actually, the truth is, I don't think any place that didn't want people to vote would come anywhere close to adopting universal voting, so I'm sure it will be adopted in places where there's already a better civic culture. But the same day voter registration is a huge reform. It was, and it's gotten a lot of popularity. It was in 6 states in 1980. Now it's in 24. Early voting, 40 states have early voting. 48 states now have online registration. 20-something states have pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds, and then so that basically you can register every high school graduating senior. So there's all of these definite reforms. And by the way,
there's a great chart in the book, by the way, that Miles helped us find that shows how much progress we've made over the years on all of these.
Yes. And the other one is the restoration of voting rights for people with felony convictions. In many, many states, it used to be that people with felony convictions never could get their voting rights back. But over the last, almost counterintuitively, but over the last 15 years, almost all of the states have eased up the requirements. But obviously in a universal voting system, what you want is that once you leave prison, or even when you're still in prison, you get your voting rights back so that it's impossible then for people to mistakenly think they have to vote when in fact they can't vote. So a post-incarceration standard, which a lot of states have now, but not everybody, would be a real step in the right direction. So this is a kind of reforms that I think we need, which is just to make it, a kind of easy and natural part of the culture. And I think, by the way, that's what, the question goes back, Clarissa, what you said of why people don't have a problem with jury duty, but why they initially respond poorly to this is they've never heard about this. You know what I mean? I think it's a lot what it is that you get used to. There's nothing philosophically fundamentally different about this from jury service, except that we've all grown up with jury service. And so that's part of our culture, just like, paying taxes, cleaning up after your dog, all these things. I think this could be the same.
Could I say a couple of quick things off that on this last point? The secret ballot. The secret ballot is another idea that came to us from Australia. Until the late 19th and early 20th century, there was no secret ballot. Your ballot was printed by your party newspaper or your political party, and you voted openly. And the secret ballot was regarded as a strange and radical idea. We have a footnote in the book to a great piece that historian Jill Lepore wrote about the secret ballot for the New Yorker. That's actually quite a lot of fun. But this was just sort of totally radical when it was adopted. And now we can't imagine voting in any other way. Similarly, when the Republic started, only white men with property could vote. And obviously, we moved a long way from that. Second, this may be a sign of how deeply honest that Miles and I are, or that we're pretty foolish. Because it's the only book you'll ever pick up that has polling that shows that as of right now, most people reject our idea. We actually commissioned a poll through the Democracy Fund, bless them for doing it for us. And we discovered that as of the moment, only 26% of Americans would support this idea. Now, actually, we felt pretty good about that because an idea that has never been advanced systematically before and that seems to run crosswise with certain American, what people would see as certain American traditions, still gets 26%. We found that 49%, if I'm doing my math right, 48% were strongly opposed, which leaves about half of the people at least persuadable. And so we think that's not a bad place to start. We also found on a different question that a substantial majority agrees with our underlying premise that 61% of Americans, we asked, is voting a right and a duty, or is it just a right, or is it neither? 61% of Americans believe voting is both a right and a duty. So the underlying premise is accepted. But the other reason we did this polling, and this goes to where you started, Clarissa, we asked opponents why they were against it. And among opponents, 46% listed as a major reason that it would disproportionately punish those who already have the hardest time voting. And we have in the book trying to answer the critics of this idea. And to those folks, that's a totally legitimate doubt about it. And we say, absolutely, we need to make it as easy as possible to vote so that that reason for opposing it would no longer apply.
Great. We'll have one more question and then we'll get to questions from the audience. So if folks online want to submit them, if they haven't already. So we're having this discussion at a university. Johns Hopkins president, Ron Daniels, recently wrote a book called What Universities Owe Democracy. The Hopkins folks do an incredible job of engaging their peers. And Johns Hopkins also participates in a program that the SLSV Coalition helps to lead called Ask Every Student, which works with over 230 campuses across the country to help them integrate full participation strategies. We also know that campuses some of them are doing a really great job of turning out very high percentages of their campus community. The Institute for Democracy in Higher Education showed through their National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement in 2020, there were dozens of campuses that had between 80 and 89% of their students that were eligible to vote turn out in the elections. So my last question to you all is, what can colleges and universities and other civic institutions do to help us build towards 100% democracy?
Well, first of all, that I totally commend the work of Students Learn, Students Vote. It is one of the real premier kind of efforts to make sure that campuses are voting, and campuses, you would think that all the college students who are, studying American democracy and all that would have high levels of voting. They have not historically. So there's, I think, a real effort that needs to be made to make sure that students are voting. And I think it's can eminently be successful. And then the second thing is, I do think that students also have the ability to go off campus and become organizers and proselytizers for voter registration and voting. So I think that to the degree that students can be energized in the process, we get a double benefit, which is the actual student vote, which is, I think, still has a way to go to reach its potential, but it's made real progress. And on the other hand, of creating, I was very, very well aware of, Democracy Summer and Freedom Summer and Vietnam Summer way back in the day. I think, students going out and making this case for voter registration would be a great thing to do as well. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you.
I've been hanging around Washington so long that I have this pandering instinct. How about every grade a student gets is raised one full letter grade if they vote? That would be a very popular reform among students, not among faculties. I want to just say first, 100% with Miles, thank you for these efforts. What you and your colleagues around the country have done is to first get universities to take some responsibility here by creating ways in which students can easily register as a normal part of their lives. And I think we need that, not just for students, but across the board. My friend Vanessa Williamson at the Brookings Institution has worked out a system where the IRS is going to help everyone register to vote. It will become part of their task. And I think we already do it through a lot of DMVs, but we should do it through human service programs of all kinds. We should try every area where the government touches a citizen should create some opportunity for people to register, and that certainly includes students. The other point I make, and one of the things we talk about in the book, is that we actually believe that this should be first a responsibility of government. In Australia, the government guarantees that almost everyone is registered in the first place. You have to register under the law, but the government has already registered most people. I think the last number we checked, it was like 96% of Australians were registered. So I think there should be some responsibility on the state to do this and to help people to make it a more democratic and representative country. But I think in the meantime, before we get there, every civic institution should be trying to get people connected to their right to vote.
I want to just say one little factoid, then I'll let you go, which is, in the 26 countries that have this in one way or another, there are all kinds of different mechanisms of either enforcement or incentivization. By the way, some people said, why don't you just do it as an incentive as opposed to you get fined? And we thought about that, and I think actually incentives would be a good thing to do. But the study show that where it is most effective, it is a requirement, and there is some enforcement mechanism. We call it light touch enforcement. But in Peru, one of the things that they do is if you voted, if you're tied on a college admission with another student, you get an extra couple of points for having voted. So there you go.
All right, well, we'll go to questions now. Do we have any questions in the room?
See, so every member of this group could get into a university in Peru.
I have a question about the poll you cited. 26% of people polled said, I'd be in favor of universal voting, but the rest of them, the majority thinks no. And I heard your explanation that, some people are worried about getting to the polls and inertia of rest. We haven't thought about that before. So that's kind of a soft opposition, I would say. We can maybe work on that. But I'm wondering, this is another theory, and I'd like your reaction to that one. The country now is so utterly polarized, and every good idea, what good idea that comes up, is opposed by the other side because they're so cynical and they're so worried that the other side is going to win. So I'm wondering if that might be a factor here. In other words, we have to just confront head on the fact that we are so polarized, and this idea, a very good idea, wouldn't be perceived as being a leftist one or a rightist one. It would be basically something would be attractive to everyone.
That's a great question. First of all, let me be clear on the polling. The single most important reason, I cited that other reason because it went to Clarissa's question. The single most important reason people have is people have a right not to participate in elections. The sort of broad libertarian argument that was cited by 59% who somewhat opposed the idea and 85% of those who strongly opposed the idea. So there is clearly in the American tradition a gut first reaction opposition to compulsion of any kind, and we deal with that and we understand that and we accept that as a reality. What's interesting, we did this polling before some of these voting issues were kind of toxified by the Trump opposition to easier voting and the like. And it was really striking that support for this idea between Republicans and Democrats wasn't all that different. Democrats, in our polling, 33% of Democrats said yes, but 29% of Republicans said yes. The bigger opposition actually came from independents, which is not surprising because independents probably feel more disconnected from the political system. The strongest support, the one group that's actually supported our idea, going to your ideological point, were people who call themselves very liberal. Now, one of the arguments we make, I agree with your premise that if this is seen purely as a progressive way to rig the electorate so progressives win every election, there will be a lot of suspicion of it. I get that. What we try to show is that we don't think this is true. That if you look at Australia, which has had this system forever, in recent elections, the Conservative Party has actually won more elections than the Labour Party, the Conservative coalition. Just to confuse us, the Conservatives in Australia are known as Liberals. But the Conservative coalition has done better in recent elections. And the idea was originally advanced by Conservatives in Australia who were worried about the power of the labor movement, who would organize more people to the polls on behalf of the Labour Party. Labor accepted it because they realized, no, we'll just do fine under this system. And we don't think that all the people who would be brought to participate in the election would be liberals or progressives or Democrats. It would bring in more young people who at the moment tilt somewhat more Democratic or progressive. It would bring in more lower income people, including Black Americans and Latinos, but also including quite a lot of white working class people. And many of whom are now voting Republican. And we have a detailed analysis of turnout in over the last several elections. Ask yourself the question, why did Republicans pick up those House seats in 2020, even though Joe Biden won the election? And the answer is between 2018 and 2020, there was a substantial increase, a big jump in the votes of non-college educated white voters who were disproportionately Republican. So we would insist to our Republican friends that this system, we're not trying to devise a system to elect Democrats. We're trying to devise a system that's fair to everybody. Now, two other things would probably be true of this system. The evidence suggests that a universal electorate would be somewhat more moderate than the existing electorate, because obviously people with very strong ideological views already vote. I know one Republican friend who would not do it publicly yet, although I'm trying to get him to, but privately likes this idea because he thinks it would make conservatives moderate themselves in ways he thinks would be constructive for both the Republican Party and our democracy. So that's another effect it would have. And it might move policy just a bit in favor of lower income people. I guess you could look at that as a progressive idea. There aren't many studies. There's one study that suggests that. It's not a huge effect. So I imagine some conservative might look at that study and say, I don't want this system, but I don't think that would be decisive. I think we can make a case that this would not mean Republicans lose every election from now to eternity, even if some people in the room would wish that were the case. We are, after all, in Baltimore.
We have a question from Pablo Wolf online. What do countries with compulsory voting do to prepare their voters to be informed and responsible? I know you addressed the informed voter critique in your book. Do any of them have K through 12 grade focus on preparing to be a citizen? Civic education.
No, well, I've just spoken a long time. I'm happy to do it. I just
go ahead. No, you go ahead.
With two things. One is we have a really hard polemic against the idea that this would lead only to uninformed voters, more uninformed voters casting ballots, where we believe that critique is a critique of democracy itself. And in fact, what we found is a lot of people who criticize our system also don't much like the existing electorate because they think voters are insufficiently informed as it is, and they might want to make it harder to vote. It's worth remembering that those phony literacy tests we had that were designed to discriminate against Black people were, in theory, justified by this idea of being informed or uninformed. Secondly, there's a lot of evidence that voters essentially know what they're doing. We cite two great books, one by V.O. Key called The Responsible Electorate, and the other by Sam Popkin called The Reasoning Voter. And I just love quoting the first sentence of V.O. Key's book. He said, "The perverse and unorthodox argument of this little book is that voters are not fools." And that is we believe that all the way down because we are confident small d Democrats. Secondly, think of where we started when we talked about the A-list voters. Now, at the moment, non-voters get very little election information or encouragement to vote. Under our system, everyone would get more than just that, what some states do a good job of setting out a voter guide, but they would get a constant flow of information from candidates on all sides. I don't know about the K through 12 education point, but I do think I agree with what Miles said, that I think there would be increasing pressure to do a better job of civic education in the schools. I think this system could encourage a culture of that. But I am absolutely willing to trust my fate to a bigger electorate. In the book, we quote Kim Beazley, who was a leader of the Labour Party down in Australia. His dad was in politics, so he spent virtually his whole life giving out cards at the polling places, urging people to vote for the Labour Party. And he made the point that the voters who came into the polls, who might not have voted without the compulsion, nonetheless, he always had the sense that they had reflected very seriously on their choice. They knew what they were doing. As he also said, they tended not to vote for extreme candidates. I think the quote in the book is something like, QAnon nuts would not do well with these voters. He said, and my favorite picture illustrating the Australian system are 4 surfers in wetsuits near Bondi Beach in Sydney, Australia, with their boards next to them, casting their ballots as they leapt out of the surf and got ready to jump back in again. And I am happy to put my fate in the hands of those surfer dudes. And I think it really shows how deep this civic culture goes, that those 4 surfers wanted to cast their ballots and they jumped out of the waves to do it. They got out of the waves to do it.
I'll just say quickly that I think there's a wonderful movement now to really increase civic education, to make it more of a stronger and stronger part of the curriculum. I think that's really, really important. And I think, to the degree that the possibility that all young people are going to be required to vote, if that helps to be an impetus to that, then all better.
Well, as much as it pains me to say it, we are almost at time already. So I apologize for not being able to get to more questions, but I wanted to let you two, if you had any final thoughts that you wanted to share, and then I think Sam Novi's going to wrap us up.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to say again, how delightful it is for us to be here, and thanks all of you for kind of doing this. It's a real pleasure in my mind to just sort of take an idea that has not been under discussion and try to really put it out into the public debate. So obviously we are hopeful that, the point of doing this and talking to the people who are online, thank you very much for listening in, is for people to buy the books. That would be a good thing, by the way. We'll be happy to stick around and sign a few if you'd like. But also to really to help to put this idea into genuine public discussion. I mean, it is our view and our intention that from the book itself, we'll kind of stand up a campaign to do this, to try to put it out in the kind of journalistic and ideas realm, to put it in the agenda of the democracy organizations, again, not to supplant other parts of their agenda, but to be an add-on, a kind of North Star, kind of forward-looking, out there idea. And then thirdly, to look for places, whether they be municipalities or states, starting in 2023, where this could be seriously considered as legislation, because that will be the point. The point is to see whether we can get this enacted somewhere. Certainly not going to be in the United States Congress for a long time to come, but I do think that there will be some municipalities and some states that will take on their roles of laboratories of democracy, as Justice Brandeis said, and see if they can put something out there that really makes a difference. So that's my hope and intention.
And just to end quickly, first, thank you to the people who made those really cool posters on behalf of Baltimore and also our book. I liked our book even better after I saw those posters. So thank you, guys. Where were those made? Did somebody
I believe the Globe Press at the Maryland Institute College of Art.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to remember. Yeah, thank you to that's a very cool part of town here. So thank you for that. We want this idea to go from why to why not. As Miles said, we think that this can begin at the grassroots. One of the appendices in the book is to a bill that was introduced in the Connecticut State Legislature to do this by, I'm proud to say, one of my former students. I don't think that's why he introduced the bill, but I'm really proud of him. He's a 24-year-old state legislator. It's also been introduced in Massachusetts. We think that there are at least 13 states, from what our lawyers discovered, that give cities pretty wide latitude to experiment with ideas like this. So we would like to see this tried in as many places as possible to show that it works and to have it bubble up as ideas like instant runoffs are bubbling up from the states, as ideas like early voting, same-day voting have bubbled up from localities. Right now we're asking, why do we have voter suppression? Why do we have lower turnout? And that's why I want people to look at this and say, we can have a democracy that includes everybody. We can have an election day that people look forward to as a celebration of freedom, and not some kind of exercise where people make it as hard for you as possible to cast a ballot. Don't even in some states let you have a drink of water, for goodness sake. We want a country where everybody is proud to be a citizen, and we want a more democratic place. And we want people to look at this idea and say, why not universal voting? And by showing up tonight, you help people start asking the question, why not? And I thank you all. We both thank you all so much.
Another round of applause for our panelists. So here's what is next. For those of us in the room here, we've got some pizza in the back, we've got some posters in the back. Stick around, chat, get a poster, get some pizza, and we also have books in the back as well. So if you want to buy a book and get an autographed copy, we can make that happen. In terms of both folks online and folks here, as Miles and EJ mentioned, it is so important that we talk about bold ideas that can move us towards full participation in this country. We're going to be doing that through the 100% democracy celebration all spring. And so watch out for emails about some of the upcoming events of a democracy data science hackathon coming up. We're going to be talking about a really cool workshop on inclusive consensus coming up. Some great other ideas bubbling up in the network. So watch out for that, and looking forward to continuing to strategize with all of you about how we make the dream of a 100% democracy real in our country, in our lifetimes. Thank you so much.